Looks good. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
Hi, Kathy. This is Brittany. I'm the moderator for this presentation. We're just waiting for interpreter and a couple more folks before we get started.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. All right.
Hey, John. It's Brittany. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Brittany.
Hello.
Hi, I'm John. I'm the interpreter.
Thank you.
No problem. Is anybody on now that needs an interpreter? It's just the panelists.
We do have some, this is Brittany, we do have some attendees, but we're waiting to get started. I'm not sure
Okay,
if any
thank you.
attendees are deaf.
Okay, no problem. No.
Hi, Kathy.
Yes. Hey, Don, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Hey,
So,
Don, it's Brittany.
hi, Brittany.
We will get started in about 1 minute. I'm happy you're here. And I got the screen up ready for you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just got back from the doctor's. I'm so sorry.
This is Brittany. Don, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get us started, please. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SILC Know Your Regs. We have Kathy Cooper from the Kansas Statewide Independent Living Council, the executive director. Very happy to have her give this presentation. There are a few points which I'd like to go over, and I'm sure you've had those go over or gone over many times before. And I'm having trouble actually reading the screen here. One of the things at the bottom, we are going to be asking questions all the way through. Kathy's going to take those questions. I will read them. So please do so in the question and answer box. There is a closed caption box at the bottom, which is the CC. We do have an ASL interpreter, John. You can pin his picture if you would like, if you need the interpreter. That way you are right there seeing him. And we do have it captioned and recorded. And if you can't see him, make sure you're in, if you can't see the ASL interpreter, make sure you're in the gallery view. If you want to join the conversation by phone or microphone, you can either raise your hand by selecting the hand raise option, or you can press *9 on the phone. And feel free to say hello and chat and join the whole conversation though today. It should be interesting. And I don't know if there's anything else that Kathy wants me to say, but I will hand it over to her. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Don. My name is Kathy Cooper. I'll do the description. I'm not the best at this, so I'm in a room. It's very cluttered. I've got luggage in the background. I joked in my last presentation that it looks like I'm getting ready to go on vacation. Like I've got them on the go anytime needed. I wish that was the case. But I have blonde hair, it's curly, and I am wearing a purple, kind of plum purple sweater. So hope that that is helpful or entertaining or whatever. So I have been the executive director of the Kansas Silk for a little over 7 years now. And when I came to the Silk, they had been without staff for about 3 years. Before that, they'd had the same director since 1994. So it's quite a long run. They had other staff as well, but a lot of things changed in Kansas. And so that's where we are now with just one staff person. So I kind of come from the perspective of a small silk, where we are a 501c3. We were the first 501c3 in the nation. We did it right in 1994. We incorporated right off the bat. I'm finding it interesting that I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with the spill revisions or updates that all but, I don't know, 4 of us got back. And one of the things that we have to revise is how our silk was established. And this has been so interesting because I thought, well, we were incorporated, we're a 501c3, and I put that information, but apparently silks were either had an executive order, or were codified into law, or a provision or something. And so I've been doing a lot of research on that because I had no idea how our silk was technically established. It's been very interesting to go back and see, you know, just all the different things that happened. So I'm still looking. I'm thankful that the state library is helping me do the research because they can deep dive into a lot more of that stuff than I seem to be able to have access to. So, but that just kind of gives you a little bit of history about me. I have worked for Centers for Independent Living before I came to the silk, so I was a little familiar with the silk, although I had no idea really all the details about the silk, and certainly not the regulations that go behind the silk and really kind of define the silk and what our duties are. So, and when I came, like I said, I had no other staff. I did have a very good working board, but I really had to learn a lot of stuff on the go. I was very fortunate, and I had a peer mentor through April, so I highly recommend that program. She helped me a lot with learning the regulations and knowing what was in those, what pertained to the silk. And ever since then, they have really just been kind of my go-to on what we're supposed to do and why that is and all that kind of stuff. So now I'm a peer mentor myself through the April program for silks. And this is one of the biggest things I always see with any silk that I work with is that they're not super familiar with the regulations. So while this is a boring topic, and I totally get that, I really feel it's important for people to know. And it will help you out tremendously when you do have issues with your DSE, or when you have issues with your SILCs or associations or anybody else, because you can always go back to the law. You can always go back to the Rehab Act. And it's really not huge. So there's no excuse for not knowing what's in there. And so what I tell people is go to it, print it off, and have it at your desk. I actually have it pinned up on my wall above my computer screen, and I can reference it anytime I need to. So, I mean, this is very interactive. I'm always paranoid that I'm gonna not have enough to say and time's gonna go on and it's gonna be like a 20-minute presentation. So please help me with that. Ask lots of questions. Hopefully I can answer them. If not, we'll work through it. But please ask lots of questions. So where we're gonna start is the law. You need to know there's the code. So the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR. I'm pretty sure everybody's probably heard that term before. But so the silk falls under the CFR, or 45 CFR 1329. And then there's point 14, which is the establishment of the silk, 15, which is the duties of the silk, and 16, which are the authorities of the silk. And I think these are kind of like the real important ones for everybody to know. I do the little favorites thing, keep these on my computer, on my, well, Internet Explorer, even that sounds pretty old right now, but I star them and keep them as a favorite so I can always go back to them and look at things, because there will be times where you think you get asked a question and you should know it because it's something you've dealt with over and over, but you think, oh, wait a minute. Huh, well, maybe I don't know. And so you can always go back to these. So that's the CFR. But then there's also the Rehab Act, and that's probably the bigger one that it goes into a little more detail about SILCs and everything. So on the Rehab Act, what you need to pin to your, your computer or have up on your wall or on your desk or whatever is Title 7, Chapter 1, specifically Part A, and Section 705. And that is the one that talks about the State Independent Living Council and why we're here and how we have to be comprised and all that. So this is a good one to have and to read through. Like I said, it's not a lot of information. It really truly isn't for this big, huge, long Rehab Act. This Section 705 it's really not that much. But it does go into detail about the establishment of the SILC and what it means. And it's important to know, because if you don't have a compliant or an established SILC, then your state technically can't draw down the Part C and Part B funding for your independent living network. So it's super important. This also talks about the composition and appointment of your council. And this is another one that I think that a lot of times people think they know through and through, but there's some things that I think throw people. So your SILC needs to be composed of 51% people with disabilities, not including people who work for the state or people who work for a Center for Independent Living. And this is important because you're not only is a total amount have to be 51%, but your voting amount has to be 51% too. And I think people don't always realize that. They think it's either one or the other, and that's all they worry about. But it's both of those, and that's in here. So, that's why it's good to go back and read through this over and over and do it, just keep yourself updated on it, because you do forget some of those things. It talks about the composition and who has to be on your council. So if you're new, especially, this is your directions. This is your go-to. And there's lots of webinars and tutorials and trainings and stuff like that have been done on this. But I always think, gosh, there just needs to be this super easy, just go to this. Just go to this if you have questions, and it's just right there. So it talks about your ex officio members as well. And again, this is another thing that I think a lot of times we take for granted. We think, oh, we have to have, so many ex officio members. But if you read the regs and what they say, it's not near as much as some people think. We had so many ex officio members, it was becoming hard to stay compliant as a SILC because they all worked for the state. And so it was throwing our total number off. And so once I figured that out, we went back into our bylaws and we changed our bylaws to not have to have as many ex officio members, and it made it a lot easier to stay compliant. Another thing on that, just that I realized, is that ex officio members, while they come from that, they're a representative from the designated state entity or state agencies that provide services for individuals with disabilities, doesn't mean they have to be employees of the state. So I have an individual who's an ex officio on our council who is a board member of the state entity and not an employee of the state. So I'm meeting my requirement for the ex officio for that entity. However, I don't have to count him as a person that works for the state, and he is a person who has a disability. So it, you know, it helps your compliance numbers. So just once you read this and really take a look at it, you know, it can make things easier on your council. You know, it also talks about the members of the council and, you know, what you should look for. It talks about just, you know, it gives you groupings, but you don't have to have those groupings. There's obviously only one that is a must-have, and that is your SIL rep, unless you are a state that has the tribal Centers for Independent Living. Kansas is not one of those. So that is really our only technical one that we absolutely have to have. The other ones, of course, it's best practice to have all these. You know, it goes through the qualifications, and they're very simple if you look at them. And I think that, you know, obviously we need to do better than just the basics and the minimum here. And that's something we've heard throughout, you know, the presentations in this conference already, the Nickel conference, you know, just really doing better about what we consider diverse. So it also talks about your chairperson, your terms of appointment. This one was a hard one for me because I never could understand why some people would come in for a full 3-year term and other people would come in for like 2 years or 1.5 years. But here it is right there in your terms of appointment. And it tells you that if somebody leaves, then you have to fill their vacancy. So you're filling a vacancy and that person doesn't necessarily start with a full 3 years. So again, that's something that I just never understood. And here it is spelled out. Let's see, vacancies in general, talks about all that. The functions, this is the biggest part. This tells you what you do. And you should know this because it's in your spill, it's most likely in your bylaws, it's probably everywhere you look as a SILC, and talks about the duties. But this is helpful because you can take this and you can, if you are struggling with your DSC or struggling with centers or whatever, you know, you can take this and show it to them. It's very plain and simple. And like I said, it's not a lot to it. And it'll tell them what your duties are, what your responsibilities are. And then of course the authorities breaks those down for you as well. And it also talks about what you can reimburse, expenses. You can't pay people obviously to be on the board, but there are stipends and, you know, travel reimbursement and stuff like that. So, you know, this helps with all of that. And that's it. I mean, look how simple that is. That's section 705 of the Rehab Act. That's what the SILC section is. That's it. Now there's more, of course. There's section 704, which is right before it, that talks about the state plan for independent living and all the different parts of that. So that's a really good section to know very well as well. And again, it's not big, but it talks about who develops the plan. And so it goes into a little more detail. And again, that can be super helpful if you're having issues with anyone to be able to go back and refer to this. Let me take a minute here and just, nope, okay, good, no questions. All right, well, that's not good though. Ask me questions. There's a lot of people on here and I don't wanna just kind of, you know, talk at you the whole time, although it's a little difficult, you know, in these situations, but please ask questions. So another section of this that I think is truly important for SILCs to know and understand is section 725. So now you've gotten into, let's see, that was part A. You've gotten into part C, and section 725 is for the Centers for Independent Living and talks about what they're supposed to do. And part of that though, number 12, and this is one I go back to a lot because I didn't realize this probably until, I don't know, 2 years ago, that this was actually in the Rehab Act, that it specifically says the centers are supposed to give the SILC their approved grant application. I didn't know that. I'd never received that. I don't think my centers knew they were supposed to give it to me. And that also that centers are, they're supposed to give their SILCs the annual report, the PPR, or the old, what we call the 704. So I've worked with SILCs before that have said, well, the centers don't want to give me that. They say that they don't have to, or they send it into ACL, or they send it into the DSC or whatever, and why do I need it? Well, first of all, it's so easy now to go to Section 725 and say, look at that, it's in the Rehab Act. And there's multiple reasons why we would need it. We need it so it helps us to be able to, evaluate and monitor the goals of the spill, just to see where things are. If there's issues that centers are having and you don't have a good relationship with your SILC and your SILs, this is one way you can go and say, oh, what are the challenges? What are the issues? Or what's working? What's working in your state? What do we need to maybe look at for the spill to get even bigger? So it's important. The grant application, I think maybe before as much information was online on ACL's website, that was probably a little more important for us to have, but I feel like I can pretty much go online and see what specific grant application that we would need, information that would be on there. So, how much Part C money do they receive? What counties or territories are they have specified to do IL in? So that kind of stuff's important, and you need to know that. And again, if you don't have a good relationship, this is one way to do it. But that kind of stuff is on ACL as well. You got to dig for it, but it's there. But I've had to send that to centers before, or had to coach other SILCs to do that. The DSC has been another one that I said, you don't need to ask for that. Well, again, it's in the Rehab Act. I do, and it's there. So
Kathy.
Yeah.
This is Don. I have 3 questions if you want me to read them to you.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. The first one's from Dora Easterling. In discussing SILC establishment, if it is unknown but in the works to work on an executive order, will that be sufficient for the new spill?
Well, I mean, here's my opinion on that. And I've had a meeting with Regina to go over our spill specifically in Kansas. And again, I said that was one of the things that we had to work on specifically, was how our SILC was established. And, from my conversation with her, and then also last week at the SILCnet call, she kind of went over that too. My understanding is, yes, if you describe it and detail it out, that you say, we can't find it, nobody knows, because that's what I'm running into. I went back to the original members of the Kansas SILC and asked them, and they said, no, we don't remember anything like that. And then I did the research through the Kansas archives and all that, went to the state library. We've gotten it down to it could possibly be in a proviso, but we can't find that specific language. Yeah, I'm going to have to say, we're working on it. We're going to look and see if we can find it. If not, then our state will look at working with the governor's office to either get an executive order, which would probably be the easiest thing, or if we can have it, as a state law that, the SILC is here and this is what they do. So yes, if you describe it, my understanding is that should work.
All right, the next one is an anonymous attendee. Would you say that the SILC is an intermediary for the SILs, or am I missing something?
An An intermediary for the SILs. No, I mean, no, I would say no, they're not. You know, the silk is like the umbrella that catches the IL for the state. And they're peers with the centers, they're peers with the DSC. And just the whole meeting the IL goals for the state is really what the SILC is there to make sure happens through all the different ways, through the spill and, you know, the forums and the community input and all that. So, I mean, I guess I would just say no to the intermediary part unless I just completely don't understand your question. But ask it in another way if I'm completely missing you here.
Thank you. So Michael has asked, when both the DSE SIL PPR and the SIL PPRs are due at the same time, what have you done to help facilitating getting the information from the SILs in time for the DSE SILC PPR?
So in Kansas, the way we do it, okay, let me back up. So we have 10 centers in Kansas. 6 of those receive Part C money. 4 of those receive Part B or state general funds, Social Security reimbursement, but no Part C. And so the DSE requires them to have the PPR in at a certain point. I ask all of the centers, all 10, to send me their PPR, usually early December. And the DSE in our state puts the data elements together for the 4, and then if the other 6 send them their PPR, they add that information in for them as well. And it's a very nice spreadsheet that comes out. And then I work with the centers a lot as it is because we have spill work groups. And so I have so much of the information already. I'm not waiting for it at the last minute through the PPR, but I have a great relationship with the centers. And so I really don't have a problem getting the PPRs. So, you know, they're just due at the beginning of December, and our centers are very good about getting that information into them, or into us, me and the DSC. And so then that gives me, you know, a full month to put the rest of the state PPR together with the DSE.
Okay. Let's see. Don Francis has asked, we use the SIL PPR reports to pull together data on services provided by our SILs to use for raising additional resources for SILs.
Yeah, I mean, that's excellent. That's what I hope a lot of people are doing. I hope that people are using those PPRs and doing some type of, you know, data mining with them, either through an annual report or to show why additional resources are needed. I mean, that's the perfect return on investment, in my opinion, for those centers to work with their SILC and to provide the SILC with that type of information and do it willingly.
Right. Thank you. There's an anonymous attendee. We have had an executive order to establish the SILC. It was just established, so I'm not sure what Regina wants. It was good we did not have an executive order, as the lack of an executive order allowed us to become a 501c3 that we could not have done under state law had there been an executive order.
Okay. Well, again, this is just my thoughts on this. I mean, I would definitely set up a time with Regina to go over this question. And she's been super receptive to that. So I encourage you to do that. But my opinion on this would be that what she probably wants is the executive order number. And whatever other detail you have on the executive order. I don't know how long of an executive order it is, but if you can give her the executive order number and title, that's probably what she's looking for. So if she wanted to go look it up, she could and see what it said. I don't think it's a bad idea, again, if it's not a huge detailed executive order, to go ahead and put that in. It is interesting to me that your state wouldn't have allowed you to become a 501c3 with an executive order. That's intriguing to me. Every state's different. I totally get that. My personal opinion is the 501c3 just really helps a SILC be autonomous, but it's not the only way to do that whatsoever. And, obviously, since, gosh, I want to say like 30 or 40% of SILCs are still not 501c3. So it's working. I just know in Kansas, it really helped us with that. So yeah, but again, I would say hopefully that helps, but definitely reach out to Regina.
Okay, there's a question from April. What section outlines the DSC relationship with the network and signing this bill?
So let me look here. I don't have that memorized, but it's in there, I'll tell you that. And then that also reminds me that we need to make sure that everybody, again, is familiar with the SILC indicators and assurances, because they also have the DSC assurances in those. So let's see here. Section, that's a good question. I should have had that up and going. So let's see, Section 706 is the responsibilities of the administrator, and that's ACL. The DSE is kind of throughout a lot of Chapter 1 of the Rehab Act, which is the section that starts with the 700s. So I would definitely have you go look at that. It could be earlier up. I don't want to waste too much time trying to find it on the fly here. But it could be. I would say start with Chapter 1, look at Section 701 and go from there. It talks about the purpose. I'm pretty sure the DSE language is in there, but specifically, now let me get back to Zoom. But specifically the assurances, again, have them up on my wall, so that's what I'm doing, I'm reaching for them. It talks about the designated state entity and what they're supposed to do. And the interesting thing about that is whenever they receive the Part B money from the feds and it comes down in their notice of grant award, those assurances are on there every single time. And so every single time they sign them, they're saying, we agree to this. So it's always interesting to me when DSCs struggle with that and say, we didn't know we had to do that. What do you mean that our only role in the state plan is that we are, sign it saying we'll be the fiscal agent or whatever? Well, it's in that. I mean, every single time they get one of those awards, they sign that. So you can always, send them back to that, show them the assurances. I know that ILRU has a DSE call, as well as, they have the SILCnet call and they have the SIL calls. But they have a DSE call, and I always make sure that my DSE knows that. We've gone through a lot of DSEs in Kansas. We have a new director. We've had a couple new program managers, which is what oversees our grants for IL. And so I always direct them back to that. It's an excellent resource.
Great. There's one more question. Eva Reynolds says, the North Carolina SILC, we operate under a governor's executive order. The new order we just received requires the SILC to be composed of 60% people with disabilities. When I asked about this specifically, I was told that the governor could ask for more than the Rehab Act requires. I don't disagree, but I'm curious if there are things the governor wouldn't be able to require.
Oh, Yeah, I think the number one thing here is that the SILC, that the states can impose additional requirements, and that's a specific question on the, in the spill, and that's why it's there. It's because some states do require additional stuff. This is the first time I've ever seen a state require more than 51%, but hey, that's probably a good thing maybe. I mean, it definitely can get tricky with compliance, but I think all SILCs should strive to be way more than 51% people with disabilities. But, this is where the autonomy really comes into play, in my opinion, is that you have to make sure your state and your DSC understands that SILC has to be autonomous from not only the state, but from everybody else too. Because honestly, you're there to make sure that it's a statewide, to make sure that the statewide IL goals are being met. And so I think it's hard for the state to do that sometimes. I think that's why SILCs were created in the very first place, was they needed that kind of, that watchdog, for lack of a better term, to make sure that bureaucracy did not take over in independent living. But yeah, I don't know of anything specific that a state can't put in there. I'm sure there are, but I'm just not aware of it. Okay.
One thing I did see in the chat that from the Nevada SILC, that their executive order states that they can become a 501c3 if they choose. So that does kind of show you how states are different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's a survey that has been going around, and it's to the SILCs, and it's asked a lot of questions about, how is your SILC comprised? Are you nonprofit? What kind of funding do you receive? How many staff you have? Hopefully everybody's filled that out, because I think we could get some really good information from that and really good data. And, those kind of things help us all in the long run, because there's been lots of times when I've had SILCs come and ask me, or when I've had to go ask other SILCs, hey, do you guys have this? Or how are you doing this? Or how's it set up? And if we have some of this like kind of generally gathered data, it's going to be very helpful. So that's just a little plug to make sure you fill out that SILC survey from ILRU if you haven't already. Let's see, we have another question. Or just a statement?
It's a statement from Don Francis from Iowa. Iowa requires that we be reimbursed by state rates and does not allow us to use the federal rates, even though using federal rates is an allowable use of federal funds. So we can only reimburse mileage at the lower state rate of 39 cents per mile, and adhere to lower state rates for meals, hotels as examples.
Yeah, good point. In Kansas, we have to, when we get our grant, one of the things that they put in there is that we have to follow the Kansas state travel guidelines for their employees, which they have changed, and they follow the federal guidelines a little more closely now. So that's nice, because it is a higher mileage rate and higher per diem rate. But, it makes it hard when they say that you need to follow their guidelines, but you don't get the benefits of their guidelines. And specifically, I mean, they talk about rental car rates or hotel room rates, stuff like that, but they have contracts with specific hotels or companies or whatever. And so they get a good rate. They get that state rate that they hold everybody else accountable to. And there's been so many times when I've had to schedule board meetings, and when we actually had in-person board meetings, and I would help set up the hotel rooms, or at least the reservations. And oh my gosh, the negotiation to get it to that state rate, because I wasn't a state entity, was a little bit frustrating. But it's not really a problem we have here in 2020, is it? For that, but yeah, good point on that. Okay. So the indicators and assurances for SILCs, those are pretty new overall, because, you know, the Rehab Act obviously has been around forever, since 1994. WIOA has been around for several years, I think, what, 5, 6 maybe now. But the indicators and assurances for SILCs are, you know, fairly new in that timeline, but they're super important for SILCs because this is what helps you to be compliant. So you need to know the indicators and assurances. You need to know what you need to have in your policies, what you need to have specifically, like who can sign the spill. You know, we just kind of always knew that as a state, but we never had it in a policy. I thought we had really good policies and bylaws, but when the indicators and assurances came out, I had to really go back and look at all of our policies and bylaws and take a very detailed look at them and say, do we have this? Do we have that? And that's another thing that when I work with SILCs, I go over that, because a lot of times they don't have everything, or they're in the process and it's kind of stalled. And so they have this draft that has a lot of this stuff, but the actual bylaws that are approved don't have any of that. And I know we're still waiting on, you know, who's going to come down and, you know, audit SILCs and make sure they're doing everything right. And, you know, it seems like it's far away, but I mean, you never know. So it's important to have that. It's important to be compliant. And it truly is helpful. Again, it gives you a guideline on how to do certain things. But probably the most important part of that is the Dsc Assurances. And I'm going to tell you, all can thank Kansas for a lot of that, because I look at the Dsc Assurances and think, this was a question or a problem or an issue that we had in Kansas with our DSC, and, you know, what I felt was kind of micromanaging. And I see it in the assurances now. And I can remember having to have several calls with Bob Williams and some other people at ACL when we were struggling to have a partnership with our DSC. And, you know, so those are, I'm just so grateful for those assurances and what they mean. And I always tell people to go back to those. And again, don't hesitate to send those to your DSC. There are state DSCs that have switched people that don't have the history and know that, you know, it was RSA or that it's changed now. And, you know, it's just, it's hard for some of them to not instantly go back to RSA and how it was then either. And so these are helpful. Use them. All right, I'm ready for that. I think we have a question, Don.
It is Don Francis from Iowa. It's a follow-up, basically. Our VR director gives us a letter for the SILC members and SIL directors to authorize us to get state rates at hotels, etc.
That's great. That's
it's helpful.
That's super helpful. That's a really good idea too. If your director, if your DSC will do that, that's a great idea to do. I'm not so sure that ours would, but yeah, that's definitely a way to get around it and not have to deal with the negotiations and the frustrations of that. So, you know, again, I said this isn't like the exciting presentation, but it's pretty basic stuff, and you really do need to know it. And like I said, there are 3 things that you really should look at and mark them and print them out and whatever. And that's, again, the 45 CFR 1329 and the Title 7 Chapter 1 Section 705. And then, of course, the uniform guidance And this one, you know what, this one's really probably the worst one, I think. So 2 CFR 200, uniform guidance. I still sometimes call it the super circular, but it's uniform guidance. And this is one that I think a lot of SILCs also don't realize that they have to follow, but it's huge and it covers a lot of different federal awardees. But you need to know this because this tells you what your allowable expenses are, and it will also tell you how to do different cost principles and what type of audit requirements you are subjected to if you receive any type of federal awards. In Kansas, we receive Part B as the majority of our funding, some state general funds too, but so we fall under that because of that Part B money. Uniform guidance very specifically talks about lobbying and that kind of stuff too. So it's just really helpful to have all of those different things. And boy, that one's the worst though. It's hard to get through and there's a lot of different sections, but I encourage you to go through it and look at it at least once. You're gonna eat up a couple hours of your time doing it, but it'll benefit you. Because there are things that we do as SILC sometimes that we probably shouldn't be doing. If you look at the allowable expenses, one of the first questions I ever had on that was if we could hire a lawyer for our SILC because we were in some auditing challenges with the state and we didn't agree with them. But it turns out you cannot. You can hire a consultant, and that's different, but you couldn't hire a lawyer to legally defend you with the Part B funds. So, I mean, you know, it's stuff like that that you just don't know, but it's in there, so it's good to have. And I see that Carmen has asked if we can write down the 3 important sections. So yeah, I will do that before this ends. I'll write down the 45 CFR, the Title VII, and the uniform guidance on that. And hopefully that'll help.
And there is a question. Could you put those numbers for the CFR in the chat, please? At the beginning in the chat, I know Brooke had put 1329 -14, -15, and -16. Would those be the same?
Yeah, those are it. And I'll do it again. That's good. And I know that they're going to have these available, but I'll do it again just real quick. And hopefully that'll make sense. So that's the Code of Federal Regulations, the 45 CFR 1329.14, 15, and 16. And then the Rehab Act is Title VII, Chapter 1, and Section 705, specifically for the SILC, and then of course, Section 704 is the state plan. Section 725 was another really good one to know because that's what your SILs, Centers for Independent Living, are responsible for. And then the uniform guidance is just 200 CFR. Let me make sure I get it right. Or, oh, I see, I got it wrong. 2 CFR 200. So it's 2 CFR 200. And then you'll have to go through the sections on that one because there's a lot. Up there. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, thank you, Brooke, for the additional things in there. And yeah, ILRU has just a tremendous amount of training on this, and there's a lot. There's a lot. You could go in there under the SILCs and do a search for it. And they, you know, any type of training, you pretty much always go back to the 45 CFR or the 2 CFR 200. And it's just what everything falls under. So they're good to know. And I think that's all I have. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. I know we're ending a little bit early. So if you guys have any more questions, just go ahead and throw them up. I appreciate it. And hopefully you got something out of this.
So this is Dawn. I would like to thank you, Kathy, because I think it's a very informative presentation and it's very important also. And I do want to remind people to please fill out the surveys, not only for this workshop, but for all of them. And there will be recordings of this and for every workshop also. Let's see, we have a question. Oh, their question was answered. Okay, cool.
And so I guess we can just go ahead and let's plug, Dawn, you are facilitating the SILC peer support session on Thursday, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good one for SILCs to go to as well. Last year, it was set up where SILCs could ask questions on how other states were doing it, or you know, if they had an issue, what other SILCs had done to get through it. So it was, you know, that's super helpful. I think it's one of the great things about SILC Congress as well, is that it really has that networking feel to it when you're just able to ask a question. You know, we have a good relationship with our DSE now in Kansas, but we did not for quite a long time. And I remember just saying, you know, how do you do that? You know, and people would just say, well, you just got to have a good relationship. You just got to build that relationship. Well, you know what? At some point, you can try all you want. But if that DSE isn't going to work with you, then there are other things you have to do. And it's not about, you know, building a good relationship per se. Sometimes it's about going to ACL or going to somebody and saying, I need you to step in, I need some help. And so that's what I always tell people. But these kind of the peer sessions, the support sessions, stuff like that, those are perfect for that kind of stuff, because you can get some real down-to-earth answers on difficult things and situations that people are having and what they've done to solve them. So I encourage everybody to do that.
I agree, and I think it'll be fun too. So if people talk, you know.
Yeah, and it looks like somebody did put on here that it will be a meeting format, not a webinar format, so you'll be able to see each other's faces, and I think that helps a lot.
It does, yeah. There's been a lot that has happened this past year, and it'll be good to listen to what people have done to go through that also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plus, you know, there was that whole spill thing.
Yeah.
That might be a talking point or two. Just saying.
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing to deal with. I panicked when I got my letter back, but you know, after going through it and talking with Regina, I feel a lot better. They're not as big of issues as I thought they were. So again, I encourage everybody to reach out to Regina if you got one of those letters. And boy, if you're one of the few states that didn't, kudos to you. You should, I hope you're up here doing a presentation telling us all how to do our spills next time. So.
Yeah. But it's always good to hear from you, Kathy. So thank you again. Thank you to our interpreter, our captioner. We only need to have one interpreter, so that was always nice too.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.